Hello and welcome to this blueprint talk on IBM Cloud Pak for Multi-Cloud Management. My name is Pratik Gupta. I'm joined today by three distinguished speakers as well. Khalid Ahmed, who is a DE in the Cloud Pak for Multi-Cloud Management. Oleg, who comes to us from Red Hat and was a former co-founder and leader of Manage IQ community. And Sai, who is a principal research staff member working on the Cloud Pak for the compliance and lifecycle management from IBM Research. This talk, as you know, is one in a series of talks we gave last year. And so this is an update from the last time I believe we talked about it in September or so. With that, I'm going to go into the material and we will give a short demo as well as to what we shipped in Q1 and then a future roadmap of where we are headed with this Cloud Pak. From a background perspective, if you look at what's happening in our clients' environments, the traditional IT is being transformed quite drastically as they modernize their applications, as they build new cloud-native applications. And almost all the clients actually now have a hybrid multi-cloud environment. What does that mean? That means they're using public clouds, more than one generally. They're using private clouds, and they have their traditional IT. And the traditional ways of doing business in silos is no longer a viable method for managing this diverse set of regions and capabilities they're bringing to market. So we talk about this whole integrated process of DevSecOps and how do we optimize those flows. And what the Cloud Pak for Multi-Cloud Management is doing is really solving three very critical problems which our clients are facing, really in terms of the processes and the people, bringing together tooling. Today they have different toolings based on the different clouds they use, based on what infrastructure they use in the on-premises stuff, for the virtual machines versus Kubernetes. And then bringing together not just IBM management tools, but a modular mechanism to bring together, other non-IBM tools in that whole integrated way. So the Cloud Pak is bringing together all of the management capability from a life cycle perspective, which optimizes the people in terms of what they're working on, the processes, which are end-to-end, and the tooling. And if you look at what really is it managing, this is a pretty typical transformation most of our clients do. They try and decommission a lot of the old stuff which they had, about 20%. They try and replace a lot of it with SaaS so that they are not dealing with non-critical items. And then the rest of half of it, they try and modernize and migrate to cloud, right? And that may be lift and shift, it may be re-platform, refactor, or build brand new cloud native things. And these ratios may vary, but this is a pretty typical environment we see. And at the end, you see a hybrid multi-cloud IT, which is really a combination of the things you see on the right? Private cloud, public cloud, dedicated, traditional, and so on. And when they actually land up with such an environment, how do their development teams manage this, right? So what the Cloud Pak is doing is enabling developers to get quick and easy access to environments and software stacks. And that is across Kubernetes, across virtual machines like VMware or OpenStack or Red Hat Virtualization, or across public cloud services like AKS, GKE, IKS, maybe EC2 VM. So, a single place to request access to this environment. Built-in remediation tools for developers in terms of detecting vulnerabilities. So we ship Vulnerability Advisor, and we work with other tools in OpenShift, including Quare and Claire, which allows remediation of code before it's deployed. Automated compliance checking. Built into the Cloud Pak is the ability to check compliance. In this release, we do Kubernetes, and going forward, as Sai is going to talk about, how we bring together virtual machine compliance checking and Kubernetes compliance checking in an integrated framework. So you can do full stack compliance and remediation, and do evidence gathering. Integrates with existing DevOps tool chains, works through GitOps, and out-of-the-box synthetic monitoring so that, as the developer deploys the application, they can see how it's performing. Essentially, it's really about increasing productivity and quality and shortening time to market. From an ops perspective, it's designed around infrastructure as code, ensuring deployments are really repeatable. And we're seeing more and more teams using this capability. A lot of the traditional teams are still early on in this journey, but as we are enabling the product, we have some blogs out there how to do it. The Cloud Pak supports it. We are helping clients think about this, and more clients are actually starting to use this. It's leveraging Git and GitOps to bring dev and ops together. Support of policies. One of the things we want the transformation for people to do is to be able to, for an operations person, to extend the number of systems they manage from between 10 and 100 to thousands. So how do they manage thousands of these entities? You may have, 5,000 virtual machines, which are spread across multiple clouds. Policy-based management and policy-based automation is the key here, which means you set the policies to how to configure these systems up front. And as new systems come under management, they automatically get configured. Long gone are the days where an ops person is manually configuring a system to bring it up, right? So the tool supports a full policy-based configuration. Built into the tool is SRE management and ops tooling. In next release, we are significantly expanding the SRE tooling, and Khalid will take you through some of those new capabilities coming in Q2. If you look at it from a compliance perspective, integrated GRC solution, and I mentioned we started out with Kubernetes and containers and certain aspect of applications, and we are extending that to the full stack, including virtual machines and operating systems. And this allows us the ability to now set policies across the board, which then can be mapped onto regulatory compliances. So the Cloud Pak as a whole supports NIST 800-53 based on controls, and then they get mapped onto very specific regulatory compliance guidelines. And of course, it is not just informing us of what compliances are, but also remediating exposures automatically. Placement of workloads can be done based on those compliance things. So certain workloads can only be placed on clusters which meet compliance requirements of those environments. And we have APIs to integrate with ecosystem partners like Sysdig and others, where if a partner product is being used, it can send its findings into the Cloud Pak dashboard. So let's look at what is the solution which we are talking about, and then this architecture is being enhanced going forward in Q2. An integrated view of application lifecycle across containers and virtual machines, an integrated workload protection and compliance capability for those environments. The container environment management. Now, in the last talk, we talked about the container management moving into Red Hat as becoming the Red Hat Advanced Container Management for Kubernetes. And so the Cloud Pak continues to leverage that and use that and extend that. And that is a great synergy between what Red Hat OpenShift team is building and delivering as part of the OpenShift platform, as part of the Kubernetes management area, and how the Cloud Pak is using that capability and extending it, and then across virtual machines and giving you really the end-to-end view of a hybrid application. Along with that is we have the virtual machine environment management. That's being provided by what used to be the Red Hat CloudForms product, and it has the Manage IQ community being run with it, and that's becoming an integral part of the Cloud Pak for MCM, and we will see some of that in the demo today. And of course, automation is being done across the board using Ansible Tower and Terraform. Day 2 operations built in, which is being expanded to full SRE operation console in Q2, and this is application and infrastructure performance management, event management and remediation. And then chargeback is a very important component which has been brought in. And I'll give you a little bit of a demo of a chargeback. Because our virtual machine environment management to cloud forms has all of the inventory of the infrastructure that is being used both on premises and in public cloud. It has the ability to assign tags to that environment, build a rate card, which is how should the internal billing work, and then create reports on that internal billing. So note, if you think about cost management, there are three aspects of cost management. The chargeback, which is how do you assign from an internal IT perspective, the infrastructure cost. The license management, which is really about what is the software running in that infrastructure and how does that license management come in. And we will talk, another talk about License Advisor, a great piece of work being done across the cloud packs for managing licenses for the IBM software, and then how that's aggregated across the cloud packs. And the third is billing. How does the public cloud environment bill? And that's the add-on to the IBM cloud pack through cost and asset management from GTS. So three legs of the stool in terms of the cost management, chargeback, license, and billing. And we're going forward, we're bringing all of the three pieces together. And then an architected way of how we do partner integration in the cloud pack. And we have a number of partners identified. Sysdig is already integrating, Turbonomic is one, Humio is another one, and we're working with other partners like PagerDuty and New Relic, and so on. So this is the framework. We'll go a little bit deeper. Anybody who wants to have the architectural view going forward, this is a current view going forward in terms of how we are building out the cloud pack. In Q1, we did some piece of work around here, but as you can see, I'll point out certain views of the architecture and we can go deeper into it. The Federation of Red Hat Advanced Container Management Kubernetes is part of the integral framework. Managing CloudForm regions, so we are supporting region support in the cloud pack now, so we can federate different regions of management across from a VMware perspective, sorry about that, and multi-cloud. And then you're seeing areas of bringing in capabilities like Ansible Tower and StackStorm from an SRE perspective. So you'll see a number of these capabilities being brought together. Anybody who has interest in the more architectural view, you have access to our GitHub and the appropriate feature specs for this. With this, I'm going to pass the baton to Oleg. Oleg comes from Red Hat. He can introduce himself and he'll take us through what is really CloudForms and how it helps us manage the virtual machine environments today. So with that, Oleg.
Hi, my name is Oleg Barenboim, and I was originally the co-founder and CTO of ManageIQ Inc., on which CloudForms is based. So just a little history to kind of get everyone up to speed. So ManageIQ was founded in 2006. We shipped our first product in 2007. And in 2012, it was acquired by Red Hat. It was not an open source product at the time. And then in 2013, early 2013, Red Hat ships CloudForms based on ManageIQ. And in June of 2014, we finally open sourced ManageIQ, the actual bits behind it all, as well as launched ManageIQ.org, which is the organization around the open source project. Last year, IBM acquired Red Hat, and in December started including CloudForms, the Red Hat version of CloudForms, in the Cloud Pack for MCM. And this year, what we're working on is building a blue-branded ManageIQ, a blue-branded CloudForms as a component of the Cloud Pack. Next slide. Okay, so what is ManageIQ or CloudForms? It is a management platform for a hybrid IT environment. What initially began as visibility into VMware quickly grew into other platforms, other virtualization management platforms such as Rev and OpenStack, and Microsoft SCVMM, and later expanded into clouds and containers. What it allows people to do is different persona can access the same CloudForms UI and have a single pane of glass perspective on their whole IT infrastructure dependent on their role. There's RBAC to ensure that each person who logs on not only sees different objects, but actually has ways, has different views into the UI. So they will see some tabs, won't see some other tabs, things of that nature. I tend to think of CloudForms as broken down into 4 different high-level areas. The first one is Insight, which kind of allows visibility into your hybrid IT environment. So we do discovery, both greenfield and brownfield. We do monitoring, utilization, reporting, performance, analytics, chargeback, which Pratik just mentioned, and trending. We also do, so that's kind of like read-only. Think of it as read-only, and here's what you can kind of do with that. Then there's kind of the control piece. The control piece kind of allows you to react to things and apply policies to things. So it enables security, compliance, alerting, and then policy-based enforcement of various resources under management. The third piece is automate. So there's a lot of kind of activities in CloudForms, such as provisioning, for example, where it's a long automated process. So, for example, you might speak to your IP address management system during provisioning to get an IP address. You might want to integrate with Remedy or something else during the process. You might want to reach out to a workplace, to a placement, workload placement service to figure out where's the best place to provision the VM or the into. So Automate allows you to do that, leveraging both Ruby, the language in which CloudForms is built, as well as Ansible. So you can automate using either of those. And then finally, there's integrate, and that's kind of more of an outside-in perspective of if you have your own system and you want to talk to CloudForms to get at things and to integrate your environment, leveraging the data and the capabilities inside CloudForms, you can through the API. And so if you have tools and processes, you can actually expand them out, communicating with CloudForms. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I mentioned, we started off by supporting VMware vSphere back almost 15 years ago, 14 years ago now, and it has expanded out into us supporting all of these platforms. We support Amazon, Web Services, Azure, Google, VMware, vCloud, so a lot of the cloud providers. Obviously, one provider that's missing from here is the IBM Cloud, and we're working on that. Then there's, the virtualization providers such as vSphere, System Center from Microsoft, over OpenStack. And then there's kind of other types of providers that we've integrated over the years. Kubernetes and OpenShift, Ansible Tower, Redfish, Lenovo xClarity, and Nuage Networks, and the Foreman project on which Red Hat Satellite is based. Next slide, please. Okay, so CloudForms is actually was actually built with a appliance deployment in mind. So we actually have been delivering CloudForms as a virtual machine that people run. And we kind of leverage that whole concept of having the CloudForms appliance be a capability to deal with scalability. So we actually team multiple CloudForms appliances into a thing that we call a region, which is further subdivided into zones. And what it allows you to do is to have a CloudForms fabric around which we deploy multiple appliances all working in concert together to manage all of the infrastructure that's available there. Yeah. And so typically what happens after that is that there's actually data centers all over the world, and a lot of companies tend to segregate the management of these data centers. And so we would do a separate CloudForms installation, a region per kind of geography, and it's really up to the customer of how to segregate all that. And then we would aggregate all of that using Postgres replication into what we call a global region, so that you have actually a single pane of glass across all of your CloudForms installations across the world. Next slide, please. And now more recently, working with IBM, we are working on another delivery format, a codified version of CloudForms that you can kind of see here in this picture. And what's interesting about this picture is that there's kind of a dotted line there in the middle on the top third there. So we're writing an operator to bring the things up that are above the dotted line. And then the thing on the left, the ManageIQ orchestrator, brings up all the various processes that we've always had inside the appliance. It talks to the Kubernetes API to bring up the various things that CloudForms needs, depending on how it's configured by the user, to enable a similar architecture, but now leveraging the Kubernetes fabric instead of the appliance fabric that we've been using for years. And we actually have this stood up inside a lab, and we're hoping that this is the version that will be included in the Cloud Pak for MCM that's upcoming. Next slide. I believe that's it for me. Over to Pratik.
View of what we are doing in CloudForms. Let me take the next 7 or 8 minutes to give you a quick demo, and I'll give you a demo of both CloudForms and Cloud Pak for MCM, and then we'll go into the next release a little bit. What you're seeing really is the Q1 release of Cloud Pak for MCM. And here you can see our demo environment managing one AKS cluster, 290 cloud VMs on Amazon, 6 on Azure, 4 Kubernetes clusters on premises, 1 kube cluster on IBM, 1 on AKS. A fairly broad support of both visibility into virtual machines and kube clusters. Total VMs to 9 Kubernetes does 22 nodes, and you can see how your nodes are distributed across the various clouds. And if I had a VMware environment, you will see it here, infrastructure VMs and VMware. In another demo environment, we have VMware connected as well. Okay. And here you can see applications. So we have 4 container apps and 3 virtual machine apps. In Q1, we give you visibility and management of these apps independently. In Q2, we're bringing it all together into an end-to-end app model, which essentially allows you to define an app, which is components on containers, components of virtual machines, and you manage it like a single integrated app from all perspectives: application lifecycle, compliance, performance management, and so on. Okay. You can see the applications here. If you look at the infrastructure, we have a number of clusters, a number of virtual machines. As you can see the numbers. I can see it by region, which says, this is on US East, US West, a data center in US, a data center in the UK. There's a region, actually a region, US. So you can essentially tag different areas for your Kubernetes clusters, allocate them to data centers or regions, and obviously we pick up the provider regions as well, which is really based on how the data centers for Amazon and others are designed, and we can kind of tag them. From a purpose perspective, we can tag areas which is dev and which is prod. And the reason why this tagging is important is all the policies then can be scoped to whether it's a cloud provider specific policy or region-specific policy, or a container policy, or a VM policy, you can start tagging it in many different ways and targeting the policies. From a compliant perspective, again, you can target compliances across by purpose. You can target compliances across by regions. You may have different compliances for UK versus US, for example. And obviously, you can look at the compliances from a provider perspective. And then these are some very specific policy profiles. You can see more of the pop profiles. We use both smart state analysis and OpenSCAP from a virtual machine perspective. And then Sai is going to talk about how we are extending that to do a lot of Ansible-based compliance, both testing and remediation going forward. If you look at certain other things, manage applications perspective, we are giving you perspective across both containers and VMs in this model, and you can see the virtual machine services, and you will see container services, and I can go into a container application. And typically, like you remember from Cloud Pak for MCM, we give you the ability to deploy apps across containers. We have the full topology model, which is based on the SIGApp model from Kubernetes. It allows you policies to deploy these things based on different types of things you want to do. The performance risk management capability is pretty similar, and obviously this will be extended in Q2. And what I will do is, rather than spending time here, and you can see the policies, we support significant number of policies. We extended the policy framework a little bit. I'm just going to talk about the policies here for a second. So you're familiar with CIS policy, audit policy, limit range mutation, and now you can start seeing VM config policies and benchmarking for CIS for Level 7. So you're going to start seeing a lot more policies coming in here from a pluggable framework across both Kubernetes and containers. A couple of other things, monitor health. Let's look at some incidents across here. The full day 2 operations here. You're seeing all of the incidents being logged into the event management system. Here we're seeing, a vulnerability advisor event. You can take these incidences and you can set policies across them, which say, should you take action or should you notify? Notification with incidents can be through, if you go outgoing, can be through ServiceNow or Slack. And of course, we support other instances in terms of how do you notify. Some of the partners are plugging in here, for example, PagerDuty and so on, will be plugging into this framework for notification across the board. You can configure runbooks, and these are automated things or manual things. It doesn't matter. You can build runbooks here and figure out whether you want to kind of automate this thing or just a sequence of steps for your SRE team, and they are, of course, rated so you can see how useful they are. And then, when you're working with runbooks, you can also trigger connections and write scripts, whether they're Ansible scripts. Other scripting tools you have, BigFix for patch management. So if you have, let's say, an incident which took place, which is because there's a CVE, because a certain thing is unpatched, you can actually go configure BigFix, or it used to be called, I believe IBM the endpoint management system, which then deploys a patch into the system and so on, right? And of course, it's got upward integration with the Netcool Omnibus from an enterprise perspective. Some of the other thing which you should think about is, let's look at some of the CloudForms integration. So all of the virtual machine information you saw in the Cloud Pak is actually coming from CloudForms. This is the CloudForm dashboard. You can see it's got visibility into clouds, and I can see all the instances which we have in cloud. In this case, we have AWS, Azure here, and if I look at the list, these are the list of providers we have, and these are the services which we have in this case, AWS. Similarly, I can go to Azure, and we have certain sort of services running on Azure, supports Google as well. And so a number of different cloud providers plugged in. Another one, I actually have VMware clusters defined in CloudForms in this instances. And so now I can say I've got 9 VMs in this VMware cluster, and we can start digging into VMware. So now we have visibility across, enterprises in terms of a VMware perspective. And of course, in this case, we are running CloudForms on this VMware system. You can start getting visibility into what's running. So fairly deep visibility and action and lifecycle management on virtual machines as well. Another view of this thing is chargeback, and I wanted to kind of show you a chargeback report before handing it over to Khalid. Let's look at some of the reports which we have. Chargeback report for accounting. I just built this report. So here what we did is we actually tagged the virtual machines and resources because Platform has access to all of the infrastructure running across the clouds and VMware. We created a rate card, and the rate card essentially says, how should I be actually, managing the storage rates? How should I be doing the compute rates here, both fixed and variable? And then we built out a report essentially which says, give me a report for this month for the department tag accounting. You could tag it by department, you could tag it by region, you could tag it by owner. It's very flexible. And at the end of the day, you get to see, all of the virtual machines. If I went to the last page, you'll see a total bill of 360, made up of it, right? Some of the other places we have visibility into is the networks across public cloud. So here in the Frankfurt Network Manager, you see how many, providers the tenants are there in terms of routers, security groups, and so on. So fairly deep visibility into the various AWS and environments. And obviously, these things can be managed by Terraform or other things. Storage visibility block storage. So here's an EBS storage manager visibility. And so now what you're really seeing is how people are using really the infrastructure of public clouds being brought in as an integrated management control plane for both public clouds and VMware and private clouds. And some of the questions in Slack were, what about Power and Z? But there are actually plug-in models for Power and Z in the compute side. So when you go to physical infrastructure or even infrastructure, there's an open source project. As being an open source project, a number of people have contributed Power VC plugin, and we hope to kind of add Z as well in here. So, Power and Z fully integrated from an infrastructure perspective, and as Kubernetes and OCP is deployed on Power and Z, obviously we can manage Kubernetes on Power and Z and the workloads across. So I just give you a quick overview of that, and then let's go back to the conversation we were having on the blueprint talk. And with this, I'm going to jump over to this slide, which really is a single view of what we are trying to do for the various personas. Based on open pluggable core, automated remediation. We're bringing in AI ops. So those of you who have heard of Project Zeno and from the Watson AI team, this is being brought into the whole portfolio from an AI ops perspective. From a developer perspective, deploy and move apps across clouds, optimize performance in the work, a continuous delivery in a hybrid environment. And obviously, we talked about single source of truth and governance and compliance and automated policy enforcement here. And then visibility, both from a cost, provisioning, scaling, and a control plan. So that's really where we are headed from a cloud pack perspective. I gave you some preview of what we have in Q1 and then where we are headed in integrated VM and container-based applications, VM and container-based compliances, a greater focus on SRE, and a greater focus on AI ops and of course integration. So with that, let's go to Khalid, and he can take us through what we're delivering in 2Q.
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'll give you an overview of the stuff that we're working on for delivery in this quarter. It's fairly ambitious release that we're trying to do, bring in a lot of capabilities and features. So I'll highlight a few of those in the next few minutes. One of them is around this notion of hybrid applications. Traditionally or historically, we've done with containerized applications, but we know that a lot of applications are not today in containers; they're still in traditional VMs. So what we're doing is extending an application model to be able to express both container and VM as resources within the application. So there's a notion of a deployable object within the application model. Previously, we just had deployers for Kubernetes or OpenShift clusters. Now we're leveraging the integrations with Cloud Forms to be able to allow you to express an application that has a VM component, let's say a database or a message queue and so on, and be able to deploy that as part of your overall application and manage that environment in a consistent way. So we're leveraging Kubernetes as kind of the control plane, but being able to manage both container-based applications and VM-based applications within that. And an important benefit of that is allowing us to tie into the overall CI/CD pipelines for applications and being able to have a consistent way of deploying, leveraging channels and subscriptions and so on. So that's one of the key capabilities that we're bringing in Q2. The other capabilities around hybrid management is around the compliance, and Sai will go much deeper into that, but the basic idea is that we can do full stack compliance across both the VM and the underlying infrastructure for container environment, the Kubernetes layer, and eventually the application layer as well. One of the key use cases that we see driving, with this whole kind of COVID crisis and so on, people moving to the cloud and accelerating that movement, is giving them visibility into the usage of costs. Now, you saw a little bit of the chargeback capabilities of Cloud Forms. What we intend to do in Q2 is kind of bring that up into the overall Cloud Pak UI and user experience so that IT operations and other personas basically can get a view of the overall cost of their applications, of their OpenShift environments, of their traditional VM environments, and so on, and being able to automate things around it. So the automation aspect, there's a lot of questions on the Slack channel about how Cloud Forms and CAM come together. What we're doing in the context of the Cloud Pak is to bring all these capabilities together in a more kind of coherent way. So some of the service composer capabilities in CAM will be used as part of the overall service library and the infrastructure automation to help in that and tie into the underlying Cloud Forms resources to be able to handle all the provisioning and so on. Another key capabilities, or a set of capabilities that we're looking to bring in, is around tooling for the SREs. So SREs today, we have a bunch of monitoring, runbooks, and automation around that. We're extending that with things like the notion of a Bastion host that allows you to SSH into individual VMs or infrastructure in a secure way, and allow session replays, session recording, session replay, so you have auditability of all the actions that your SREs have done. We're adding capabilities around ChatOps type of integration, leveraging a tool from the open source called StackStorm that allows SREs to collaborate in a Slack channel. And StackStorm has a bunch of integrations with third-party tools and is extensible, so that it can allow us through Slack to interact, get a list of events and incidents, and take actions or call other systems and other things as part of the SRE process in isolating and troubleshooting events and incidents. Okay. We're also working in a number of areas around modernizing some of the foundation. Maybe we can switch to the next chart, Pradeep, to give an overview of some of the capabilities from an architecture perspective. Okay. So this is kind of two things I want to call out in this chart in the next minute or two. One is that we know that the core Kubernetes multi-cluster management, there's a number of projects both in the open source, and we're working with Red Hat on moving some of the core MCM code into the open source, and that will be provided as the Red Hat Advanced Cluster Manager. And then there's also other tools. Rancher has Fleet, and there's also the project with the IBM Cloud around Multishift, which is delivering a multi-cluster Kubernetes management framework as kind of the underlying foundation, right? So we see these things as good things that we can leverage and build on top of, right? So we will be leveraging Multishift and leveraging the Red Hat ACM, and also for the VM management, leveraging the Cloud Forms regions as the underlying capabilities to manage and orchestrate the VM resources. Now, on top of that, we're building the Cloud Pak for multi-cloud management that will tie together a bunch of tools. In order to do that, we need to have a thin layer of kind of platform services, or you can call them common services. Historically, the Cloud Pak has been, about, several different tools, but in order to integrate them together, we need a common view of inventory. We need a common view of relationships between objects within that inventory, an event mechanism to notify various components, and so on, right? So all these lower layer services we're intending to kind of roll out in the next quarter or two. Some of these will be introduced in Q2, but the idea is to have a more coherent set of capabilities that the upper layer functions can plug into and have a more consistent experience between the components of the product, whether it's automation or monitoring or service library or the app model in GRC and so on. And that also helps reduce the overall footprint of the components with the cloud pack, so it's a lighter weight to deploy. Okay, with that, I will turn it over to Sai to talk about the hybrid compliance work.
Thank you, Khalid. My name is Sai. I'm from IBM Research. So my team has been working with Cloud Pak for MCM since end of last year, with focusing on the risk and compliance, which is a core capability to safeguard the client's hybrid IT environment and reduce the risk exposure to the cyber attacks. So why this is an important problem? And so one data point here, is a study performed by Follemans and back in 2018 on the cost of data breach study. It's evaluate that for each breached record, it's cost about $148. And also there's 11 instances of a cloud misconfiguration they analyzed, which cost organization upward of combined $57 billion the cost. And also in that study, they rate the top the cost drivers, which include the compliance failures, the IT environment complexity, and also plus the IT operational technology in use. So that's the importance domain we wanted to focusing on. And also, how are we doing as a service provider? So I give some data point. This is date back 2 years ago from the GTS service delivery. So we manage the security and compliance for over 2,000 clients and oversees 500,000 servers. And if you look at the user ID, we're managing more than 60 million user IDs, and there's yearly more than 52 million health check deviations we're trying to handle, remediate. And from a patch perspective, 25 million plus patch records created every year. So this is scales we're dealing with, and as an IT provider, but also, you can replicate this to the if customer manage their own IT, right? So they have, large volumes of the security compliance, the work to be handled. And so if I characterize the challenge GTS is facing, so I think 3 things here. One is manual driven, the labor driven. The second one is that the really not optimized based on the risk exposure to the cyber attacks and where we spend the labor the most, wisely. We don't do that. And it's also very reactive mode because firefighting is a constant norm. There we work based on what things already happen, right? So what does this mean is that translate into we do need technologies to help to automate the tasks and also to be able to drive more proactive the mode using, and the last thing would be the risk driven, right? To have to explain the risk to the operational team so they can prioritize work based on the risk so that we can minimize risk exposure to the cyber attacks. So next chart, please. So this is just give you an example. What do we mean by the compliance? What are policy we're trying to enforcing? And this is one policy we take out from the CIS benchmark. So CIS is the Center of Internet Security Consortium. They have the best practice embedded inside the policy for the compliance. And one example would be that I want to ensure the shadow password, sweet password I set. This could including the password length, expiration date, and so on. So this will be applied for both the VM world, whether it's the VM delivered through the IBM Cloud, AWS, or the VMware, the vCenter, and it could also apply to the new world Kubernetes cluster environment. So next chart, please. Yeah, so what we have been working on is really, we call this as the hybrid GRC, governance, risk, and compliance framework. So last year, what MCM delivered, as Pratik pointed out, was focusing on the security and compliance for the Kubernetes-based, container-based environment. So what we did is that we actually extend that and still using the same control plane Kubernetes-based, but we extend that to be able to manage the VMs. So I'm not talking about the VMs sitting in the Kubernetes. I'm talking about the VMs outside Kubernetes, which could be in the public cloud, which could be in the traditional data center VMware environment, and the power and so on. And so that's one thing. We also extend the policy framework and to which was Kubernetes focused to the manage the VMs. So by doing that, we are zooming to one central control plane, Kubernetes based, and one policy framework, and to manage both VMs and containers workload. So that's one thing we brought in. And the second thing is focusing on the evidence collection to persistent current compliance state, and so that we can help on both two fronts. One is to be able to do the risk assessment with the understanding what are the violations, what are the vulnerability present on the infrastructure elements. We can calculate the risk. And also another thing is important from the audit perspective. We stored this evidence. So for the audit, the examination and so on. So that's for the evidence collector part. The third part is on the risk analyzer. So we be able to assess the risk for both policy itself, like the control, the compliance policy control, and also vulnerability present, and also combined with IT compliance states. And by doing this, we can help operational team be able to privatize and to instrument their work so that focusing on the most risky and the vital resources, and to make sure they are more safe and safeguarded. By doing this, can minimize the entire risk and vulnerability exposure for the client IT environment. The last thing is also to integrate with the Ansible, so that Ansible can become the automation engine to tap into the VMs, scan the VMs for the compliance states, and to remediate on the fly and bring back the compliance remediation results. So that, and so by this is the important thing where, because in GTS, the Ansible is rolling out everywhere for over 2,000 clients. So by doing this, we can reserve their existing investment on the Ansible tower. So, but Cloud Pak for MCM can become the central control plane or the brain and instrument Ansible as the muscle. Okay, next chart, please. So next thing to a little bit zooming is on the risk analyzer and how we do the risk scoring here. And so importance of this is help to privatize work, right? So that we're focusing on the high risky the resources to minimize the risk. And the methodology we leverage here actually is vetted through the effort working with the GTS, the global process owners on the risk, on the patch, on the health check, and also through the collaboration working with the security business unit on this. So there's three major elements of the risk methodology here. The first one is to establish the risk baseline. So there's key elements here is that we need to understand the patch vulnerability and configuration control, the policy, what are the baseline, what are the score of each this baseline. And this is leveraging the X-Force scoring methodology from Security BU. And we also leverage the AI approach we develop, so that because there's a lot of vulnerability knowledge in the market or in the community about the patch management, but they don't have a lot of data about the compliance, the policy control points here. So we use transfer learning to leverage the knowledge from the massive data from one domain and into another domain. So that's for the policy baseline we established. The next thing is focusing on the resource, the baseline, where the focus is to understand your characteristic of your environment, because if your resource or VMs are internet facing versus behind the firewall, of course your risk level will be different. If you are production workload versus the dev test environment, your risk level will be different. So we reflect those into the calculation. Also, the last thing, the baseline is the impact baseline. This is really focusing on what's business criticality, right? If this is the application production application which are crown jewel for my business, maybe the risk level will be high if there's a vulnerability or the non-compliance and so on. So we marry the baseline with the operational results, and which is really we gather from the scanning by the Ansible and the Aqua script and so on, and knowing what are missing patches, presented vulnerability, what are misconfigurations, what are your inventory characteristics, combine those, and then we can calculate risk at different levels. The resource level, this is talking about individual VM, container level, the group level, meaning the cluster level, and also line business of the VM groups and so on, then aggregate all the way to the account level. So that's the methodology where we're using embed inside Cloud Pak for MCM. So back to you, Khalid.
Okay, I'll just kind of quickly go through this slide. You can also jump in if you feels. But this is just kind of giving a view of the overall roadmap for the Cloud Pak. We delivered a bunch of capabilities in 1Q that you saw about bringing together VM management and container management with that hybrid inventory, and introducing some level of governance and compliance for both containers and VMs. Independently. And Q2, as I mentioned, we're bringing a lot of these capabilities together with the hybrid app model and the GRC model being extended. One thing that we're trying to do in Q2 is having deeper integrations with other Cloud Paks as well, specifically like Cloud Pak integration around MQ and so on, so that there will be more capabilities out of box that will help you manage the other Cloud Paks within it. I talked about the cost management and the SRE tools. One of the other initiatives that we have for Q2 is to deepen the integration that we have with delivering the Cloud Pak on ROCs, and then also starting to look at the, some of the multi-ship work as well. So we will continue as one of our main thrusts, because of this whole cloud first kind of delivery model, to deepen what we do on the cloud and deliver our software on the cloud. And there's a number of integrations that I think Pratik pointed to with third-party tools, where we're trying to build an ecosystem around the Cloud Pak to enable things like Sysdig and Humio for logs, and New Relic and PagerDuty to all plug in. Turbonomic is another interesting capability that provides more advanced placement services and application resource management and so on. And lastly, the Red Hat Advanced Container Management, it will be shipped towards the end of Q2 is our understanding from the Red Hat timelines. We're basically trying to align with that and make sure that we work on that. Going forward in the second half of the year, a lot of capabilities on extending and expanding the compliance capabilities around security and so on, and especially around scale and high availability, active deployments for the hub cluster, and being able to manage things at large scale, et cetera. So those are kind of the overall capabilities that we're looking at for delivering on this Cloud Pak in the next year or so. It's a journey. We're evolving the products and components, building some of those components in a more modular way, and integrating them better and so on. So with that,
let me add a few more things. Let me add a few more topics to this conversation from the Slack channel. As you notice, CloudForms is being containerized and partified. and which converts it into the microservices-based architecture the Cloud Pak is based on. And that allows a much cleaner pluggability going forward from both a UI navigation perspective and using integrated APIs across the whole thing. So as we go forward, we start federating these things using microservices architecture underneath it makes it much easier. And it's also Kubernetes centric. So using custom resource definitions and CRDs also makes the whole architecture pretty coherent across the board. The second topic I think was on the is it multi-tenant and SaaS? We are rapidly moving towards a SaaS delivery model. Initially, it's obviously a single tenant model, moving to a managed model to a SaaS model. So you are going to see a significant evolution of the Cloud Pak for service providers, and of course for us to deliver it as SaaS on IBM Cloud. Scale and scope. You saw a little bit of it from a region support perspective. The objective is to support larger and larger scales, and we do that using delegation and multi-region capability, both in terms of CloudForms already supports that today, and the rest of the Cloud Pak with federation across multi-shift, as well as Red Hat Advanced Container Management Kubernetes. It gives us a much higher scale from an enterprise perspective. AI Ops is another interesting capability we talked about. That's going to come in as well going forward. And then, the ability to manage environments. So we talked a little bit about cloud and private cloud. I think what I did not mention is, there are plugins for Power VC as well as for the virtual side. And then there are plugins for, and obviously there are plans for running Kubernetes. And ICP already ran Kubernetes on Power NZ, and it can manage those environments as well. So you're seeing a full end-to-end management platform with an application which runs all the way from public cloud on Kubernetes and containers to virtual machines on premises to private clouds all the way back into Power NZ. And that's really the end-to-end hybrid cloud environment we want to manage for our large clients. With that, that's all I have for the talk today. There are some other charts which are backup charts for people who want to see. But with that, I thank you for attending. Please continue to ask the questions on Slack. We will continue to answer them. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you. That then will end today's Blueprint talk. Thank you.
Thank you.